The Santos family's new home was everything they had dreamed of. Spacious, with a charming garden and located in a quiet neighborhood, perfect for starting a new chapter in their lives. Maria, Carlos, Anna, and Lucas were excited about the move. After months of searching, they had finally found the ideal place to call home. On moving day, the atmosphere was full of excitement. The moving truck parked at the entrance of the two-story house with large windows and a facade that combined the charm of the past with the comfort of the present. The family soon noticed that the house had something peculiar. In every room, there was an old, large and ornate mirror with wooden frames carved in intricate details that seemed to tell stories. Maria, the mother, was the first to notice the mirrors. As she unpacked in the master bedroom, she paused to look at herself in the mirror, dominating one of the walls. The surface was slightly tarnished by time, but the reflection was clear. She moved closer, noticing how the frame seemed handcrafted, each detail meticulously carved. There was something hypnotic about that mirror, something that sent an inexplicable shiver down her spine. "What a strange mirror," she murmured to herself, stepping back with a slight unease. "But it fits the style of the house." She decided not to dwell on it. After all, moving into such an old house would certainly come with its quirks. Carlos, the father, was busy arranging the furniture and overseeing the movers, but he noticed Maria's distant look when she left the room. "Are you okay, honey?" he asked, concerned. "Yes, it's just... these mirrors give me a strange feeling," she replied, trying to laugh off her worry. "We're probably just tired. This place is incredible, don't worry," Carlos reassured her with a smile. Upstairs, Anna and Lucas were exploring their new rooms. Anna, in the throes of adolescence, was thrilled with having her own space. She loved the privacy the room provided, but when she looked at the large mirror that dominated the wall beside her bed, she felt a chill. Unlike the mirror in her parents' room, this one seemed darker, as if it was absorbing light rather than reflecting it. She shook off the feeling, attributing it to the nerves of the move. Lucas, the youngest, was more interested in his boxes of toys than the mirror in his room. However, he gave his reflection a quick glance and waved, as if the mirror were an old friend. The house was finally starting to feel like home, with furniture in place and boxes being emptied. As night fell, the atmosphere became calmer, with each family member settling into their respective spaces. But that first night, as everyone prepared for bed, something peculiar happened. The mirrors, until then merely silent observers, seemed to come alive. Strange reflections began to appear, brief enough to be dismissed as imagination, but disturbing enough to leave an unsettling feeling in the air. Maria was the last to turn off the lights. As she lay down beside Carlos, she glanced at the mirror in their room. She could have sworn she saw something move there, a shadow, or perhaps an undefined shape. She closed her eyes tightly, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. "It's just exhaustion," she whispered to herself. But the discomfort lingered, like an invisible, silent presence that seemed to watch the family through those ancient mirrors. The first night in the new house had begun, but the true terror was yet to come. The next morning, the Santos house was wrapped in an unusual quiet. The sun streamed through the large windows, illuminating every corner and highlighting the architectural beauty of the place. However, there was a subtle tension in the air, as if something invisible was moving in the shadows. Maria woke up early as usual. She enjoyed the tranquility of the early hours before the rest of the family got up. After making coffee, she went back upstairs to get ready for work. As she entered the room, the mirror immediately caught her attention, as if it had been waiting for her arrival. She hesitated for a moment, remembering the unsettling feeling she had the night before. But she forced herself to ignore the discomfort and began brushing her hair in front of the mirror. As she did, she noticed something strange. The reflection seemed different. It was subtle but noticeable. Her face was there, of course, but there was something in her reflection's eyes that didn't seem like hers. Something sad, almost desperate. Maria blinked, shaking her head to dispel the thought. Maybe it was the accumulated fatigue from the move, or just the nerves of being in a new house. But as she continued to look, the reflection seemed to take on a life of its own. The fine lines on her face deepened, her eyes grew darker, as if she was seeing a version of herself that had carried heavy burdens for a long time. She stepped back abruptly, her heart racing. "I'm imagining things," she said out loud, trying to convince herself, but the feeling persisted. Somehow, that reflection didn't seem to be just a reflection. During breakfast, Maria was distracted, her thoughts still caught up in the strangeness of the mirror. Carlos noticed his wife's silence, but decided not to press her, assuming she was just tired. Anna and Lucas, on the other hand, were excited, talking about their plans for the day. After everyone left, the house fell silent again. Still unsettled, Maria decided to investigate the mirrors a little further. She remembered seeing a small metal plate on the back of the mirror in her room while cleaning the day before. Maybe it held some clue as to where they came from. She slowly climbed the stairs, each step echoing through the empty house. When she reached the room, she went straight to the mirror and carefully moved it away from the wall. There was the plate, old and worn, but still legible. In small engraved letters it read, Maison de Miroir, 1892. The name sounded French. Perhaps the mirror was an antique. Curious, Maria grabbed her phone and started searching for information about Maison de Miroir. She found some records about an old mirror house in France, famous in the late 19th century for making mirrors for the nobility. However, there were dark rumors surrounding the house. Some people believed that the mirrors made there had mysterious properties, capable of reflecting more than just physical appearance. Maria felt a chill run down her spine. The idea that the mirrors might be more than just an old piece of history disturbed her, but at the same time, there was an inexplicable attraction, as if the mirrors were trying to tell her something she needed to uncover. Meanwhile, at school, Anna was dealing with her own discomfort. The night before, after going to bed, she had trouble sleeping. The mirror in her room seemed to pulse in the darkness, as if it were calling to her. When she finally fell asleep, she was tormented by strange nightmares, all involving her reflection. The next morning, as she prepared to leave, Anna avoided looking at the mirror, but couldn't resist. When she finally approached, she saw something disturbing. Her reflection was there, but there was a slight difference, almost imperceptible, a vacant, distant look, a sadness that didn't match what she was feeling. The vision haunted her throughout the day, but she mentioned nothing to anyone, keeping the fear to herself. With each passing hour, the mirrors seemed to gain more power over the house, a silent but constant presence that slowly began to mess with the minds of each member of the Santos family. What had once been just an uncomfortable feeling was transforming into something deeper, darker, and Maria knew this was only the beginning. The days that followed brought a growing sense of discomfort for Anna. Every time she entered her room, she felt a silent, almost oppressive presence emanating from the mirror. It was as if the object was waiting for her, eager to reveal something she wasn't prepared to see. Anna was a reserved, introverted girl, and had always felt a little out of place, especially at school. Although she had friends, she often struggled with feelings of inadequacy and fear of rejection. Since moving into the new house, these feelings seemed to have intensified, as if the mirror was somehow amplifying her insecurities. On a rainy afternoon, after a long day at school, Anna returned home feeling more alone than ever. There were rumors that she was strange at school, and the whispers followed her down the halls like shadows. When she entered her room, she dropped her backpack on the floor and went straight to the mirror, drawn by a force she couldn't understand. The reflection seemed to be waiting for her. At first, everything looked normal, but then Anna noticed something subtly wrong. Her image was slightly blurred, as if there was a mist between her and the mirror. She leaned in, frowning, trying to understand what she was seeing. The mist began to clear, and a version of herself appeared in the mirror, but it wasn't exactly her. The Anna in the mirror looked younger, more fragile. Her eyes were filled with sadness and despair, and there was a palpable loneliness in her expression. It was as if she was seeing a part of herself that she had always tried to hide, a version of her that feared being judged and rejected, the version of her that felt invisible, even in a crowd. Anna stepped back, her heart racing. "This isn't real," she whispered to herself, trying to push the vision away. But the reflection remained, now sharper, more present. It was as if the mirror was holding up a mirror to her soul, showing the most vulnerable and insecure part of herself. Desperate to escape that disturbing vision, Anna covered the mirror with a sheet, trying to drive away that feeling of exposure. But even with the mirror covered, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. The disturbing reflection lingered in her mind, repeating like a dark echo. In the days that followed, Anna avoided looking at the mirror at all costs. Every time she passed by it, she felt a shiver, as if she was being watched. She began to sleep poorly, waking up several times during the night, always with the feeling that something was there with her, in the shadows. One night, after another difficult day at school, Anna went to bed early, trying to escape the anxiety that seemed to surround her. But sleep wouldn't come. She tossed and turned in bed, listening to the soft sound of rain tapping against the window, a sound that normally calmed her, but now seemed to amplify her discomfort. Then she heard it. A soft whisper, almost imperceptible, coming from somewhere in her room. Anna froze, listening intently. The whisper repeated, this time a little louder, and she realized it was coming from the covered mirror. Frightened, she slowly got up, feeling panic rising within her. Each step toward the mirror was heavy, and the whisper continued, growing clearer, as if it was calling her name. With trembling hands, Anna pulled the sheet off the mirror, revealing the dark, silent glass. For a moment, everything seemed normal. She let out a sigh of relief, thinking she had imagined it. But then, the reflection began to change again. The version of herself that appeared now was crying silently, tears streaming down her pale face. It was a vision of pure despair, a physical manifestation of Anna's deepest fears. "I am you," the reflection whispered, with a voice that was both Anna's and not. "I am what you don't want to see." Anna took a step back, her heart pounding. That wasn't just a reflection. It was a part of herself that she had always tried to hide, now revealed in all its anguish and vulnerability. She couldn't bear it any longer. With a stifled scream, Anna ran out of the room, leaving the mirror and her reflection behind. She rushed down the stairs, the sound of her footsteps echoing through the house, and took refuge in the kitchen, where the bright light and the familiar sound of the radio offered some comfort. But even there, in the safety of the kitchen, Anna knew she couldn't run forever. The mirror had revealed something she needed to face, something that had been inside her all along. And deep down, she knew this was only the first of many dark revelations that the house and its ancient mirrors would bring to light. Carlos Santos had always prided himself on being a practical man. As a civil engineer, he was used to solving complex problems with logic and precision. When they moved into the new house, he was impressed by the solidity of the construction, admiring the architectural details that had withstood the test of time. But in recent days, something in the house had begun to challenge his logical view of the world. After days of intense work, Carlos finally had a night to relax. With the family already in bed, he decided to go down to the office on the first floor, a space he had quickly claimed as his personal retreat. There, a more modest mirror occupied one side wall, a piece he had noticed but hadn't paid much attention to. Carlos sat at his desk, reviewing some projects, while a glass of whiskey rested beside his hand. He was used to solitary nights of work, but that night there was something different in the air, a feeling he couldn't quite define. It was as if the house was alive in a way he couldn't explain. As he focused on the drawings and calculations, something caught his eye, a movement in the mirror. He turned quickly but saw nothing out of the ordinary. The reflection was what he expected. The quiet room, his bookshelves and himself sitting at the desk. Carlos chuckled to himself, shaking his head. "I'm getting paranoid," he murmured, returning to his work. But the feeling of discomfort didn't leave him. As the hours passed, the work began to weigh on his mind. Carlos rubbed his eyes, trying to shake off the fatigue, and it was then that he saw it. In the mirror, his reflection stared back at him, but something was wrong. The image seemed slightly distorted, as if a wave of heat was passing between him and the mirror. And then, gradually, the expression on the reflection changed. Carlos watched, frozen, as the reflection in his mirror took on an expression of utter failure. Deep wrinkles appeared on his face. His eyes, once full of determination, were now vacant, tired. The reflection in the mirror seemed to exude an aura of defeat, as if the weight of his responsibilities and expectations were crushing him. He tried to pull away, but his eyes were locked onto that horrible vision. Carlos's rational mind struggled to find an explanation, but there was no logic to it. The reflection seemed more like a premonition, a vision of what he might become if he failed, a broken man, unable to support his family, to maintain his dignity. The thought of failure had always been a silent fear for Carlos, a fear he had never confessed to anyone, not even himself. But now, that fear was right in front of him, projected in the mirror like a shadow of what could happen. He tried to look away, but it was as if the mirror was holding him there, forcing him to face what he feared most. Carlos's breathing quickened, and sweat began to trickle down his forehead. The room around him seemed to shrink, as if the space was closing in on him, suffocating him. Suddenly, the image in the mirror smiled, an empty smile, conveying no comfort, only despair. Carlos leapt back, knocking over the glass of whiskey, which shattered on the floor, the amber liquid spreading like blood. The impact broke the spell, and he finally managed to move, backing away from the mirror with his heart pounding wildly. He didn't know what had just happened, but one thing was clear. That mirror was revealing something much deeper than simple reflections. It was showing him his worst fears, his greatest failures. That night, Carlos went upstairs without looking at any of the mirrors in the house. He lay down beside Maria, who was sleeping soundly, trying to find comfort in the familiarity of her touch. But sleep didn't come easily. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that empty smile in his mind, the smile of a defeated man. Carlos knew he needed to understand what was happening, but a part of him was terrified of what he might discover. He had always been the family's foundation, the one who kept everything together. But now, he felt like he was starting to crumble. As the darkness of the night enveloped the house, Carlos wondered how much longer he could keep everything under control, and more importantly, what would happen when he no longer could. He had no idea that the mirror in the office had not yet finished revealing its secrets. Lucas, the youngest of the Santos family, had always had a vivid imagination. Like many children his age, he enjoyed making up stories, creating entire worlds in his mind where he was the hero, facing monsters and challenges with bravery. For Maria and Carlos, this creativity was an endearing part of their son's personality. But in recent days, something in Lucas seemed to have changed. It all began innocently enough. After the move, Lucas started spending more time in his room, playing alone. At first, his parents didn't find this concerning. After all, he was adjusting to the new environment. But soon, Maria began to notice that Lucas seemed to be talking to someone when he was alone. She would hear him laughing, whispering, sometimes even arguing, as if he were engaged in a heated discussion. "Curious," Maria asked. "Who are you talking to, sweetheart?" Lucas, with the naturalness of a child, replied, "With my mirror friend, Mom. He's really nice, always keeps me company." The answer left Maria unsettled. She looked at the mirror in Lucas's room, a small old mirror with a simple frame. Until then, she hadn't paid much attention to it. But now, the idea of Lucas interacting with a reflection bothered her. "Oh, really?" She tried to sound unconcerned. "And what's this friend like?" Lucas smiled, as if sharing a secret. "He's like me, but a little different. He knows things I don't know, and sometimes he tells me secrets." Maria smiled, but the discomfort was evident on her face. She decided that maybe it was just a phase, something that would pass with time. However, Lucas's conversations with the friend in the mirror continued, and soon they became more disturbing. One night, while Lucas was playing alone in his room, Maria heard him talking loudly, as if he were upset. She quickly went upstairs and stopped at the door, watching her son. "I don't want to do that," Lucas shouted at the mirror, crossing his arms, as if he were rebelling against something. Maria entered the room concerned. "What's wrong, Lucas? Why are you upset?" Lucas turned to her with a stubborn expression. "My friend said I should do something, but I don't want to. He's being mean." Alarm bells rang in Maria's mind. "What did he ask you to do?" Lucas hesitated for a moment, his big, innocent eyes filled with confusion. "He said I should play a trick on you and Dad, but I don't want to. I know it's wrong." Maria felt a shiver run down her spine. This was going too far. She tried to stay calm, kneeling beside her son. "Lucas, you know that what your friend says isn't real, right? It's just a game of your imagination." Lucas looked at the mirror, then at his mother, and slowly nodded. "But he seems so real, Mom. Sometimes I feel like he's a brother." Those words left Maria even more disturbed. She decided it was time to intervene. That night, after Lucas went to bed, she talked to Carlos about their son's behavior. They agreed that the mirror was having a strange influence on Lucas and decided to remove it from his room. The next day, Carlos took the mirror off the wall and carried it to the basement, a space they rarely entered. Lucas watched in silence, not protesting, but he seemed sad, as if he were losing a real friend. After the mirror was removed, things seemed to improve. Lucas went back to playing normally, and the conversations with the friend stopped. Maria and Carlos felt relieved, thinking that maybe it had all just been a phase. But that night, something unsettling happened. While Lucas slept soundly, Maria and Carlos heard a strange noise coming from the basement, the sound of something dragging, followed by a faint, childlike laugh. Maria felt the blood freeze in her veins. "Did you hear that?" she whispered to Carlos, who was already up, trying to understand what was happening. They quietly descended the stairs, stopping in front of the basement door. The sound had ceased, and everything was quiet. Holding their breath, Carlos opened the door, illuminating the path with a flashlight. The basement was dark and cold, with only the flashlight breaking through the darkness. They advanced carefully, their eyes searching for any sign of movement. Then, the flashlight's beam landed on the mirror. It was standing against the wall, just as Carlos had left it, but something was different. In the reflection, a small, indistinct shadow seemed to move slightly. It looked like a boy, but not exactly like Lucas. It was more like a distorted version, with a smile that seemed to be plastered on its face, lifeless. Carlos swallowed hard, but kept the flashlight pointed at the mirror. Maria stood beside him, her heart pounding, but not knowing what to say. The mirror seemed to pulse, as if it were breathing along with them. Then the shadow moved, as if it were approaching the glass. Carlos quickly covered the mirror with an old towel that was nearby and stepped back. "This can't stay here," he said, his voice trembling slightly. The next morning they took the mirror outside, determined to get rid of it. Carlos put it in the car and drove to a remote area where he discarded it at a junkyard along with other unwanted items. He returned home feeling lighter, believing that the problem had been solved. But even with the mirror gone, Maria and Carlos couldn't ignore the feeling that something deeper was happening. Lucas seemed relieved, but sometimes, when she looked at him, Maria saw a glimmer of longing in his eyes, as if he still felt the presence of the friend. And deep in their minds, both Maria and Carlos knew that the mirrors in the house still had much more to reveal, dark secrets that were only beginning to emerge. Part 6. The connection of the mirrors. Maria couldn't shake the feeling that removing the mirror from Lucas's room hadn't completely solved the problem. Something in the house still felt unsettling, as if an invisible presence was always lurking, watching the family's every move. She decided it was time to dig deeper into the history of the mirrors and the house itself. After dropping Lucas off at school, Maria dedicated the morning to more detailed research. Sitting in the kitchen with her laptop open, she began searching for information about the house, and especially about the mirrors. The plate on the mirror in her room had mentioned maison de miroir, and she decided to start there. The more she researched, the more disturbing the discoveries became. Maison de miroir was an old French manufactory that produced mirrors in the late 19th century. However, the factory had a dark reputation. There were stories about how the mirrors were used in occult rituals to capture people's souls or reflect the darkest parts of the human psyche. Some said the mirrors from Maison de Miroir didn't just show reality, but also distorted and amplified the deepest fears and desires of those who looked into them. Maria felt a chill as she read these accounts. Everything seemed to fit with what was happening to her family. The mirrors in the house seemed to be more than just reflections. They were revealing something dark and disturbing within each of them. Determined to find out more, Maria searched for information about the history of the house. She found old records indicating that the house had once belonged to a collector of unusual artifacts, many of which were considered cursed or possessed some kind of mystical power. Among these artifacts were several mirrors brought from Europe, specifically from Maison de Miroir. Maria felt panic rising within her. The house, which seemed like the perfect home, was in fact steeped in a history of darkness and mystery. The mirrors weren't just decorative objects, they were conduits for something much more malevolent. Determined to protect her family, Maria began examining each mirror in the house. She noticed that they all had similar characteristics: ornate frames, glass slightly tarnished by time, and the same unsettling feeling of something deeper beyond the reflected surface. It was while examining the mirror in the hallway that Maria made an even more disturbing discovery. As she approached it, she noticed that when she lightly touched the frame, she felt a slight vibration, as if the mirror was pulsing with life. The vibration was almost imperceptible, but constant, as if the mirror was breathing. With her heart pounding, Maria tried to move the mirror away from the wall, and that's when she noticed something else strange. There were small marks around the mirrors, like inscriptions or symbols carved into the wood of the frame, almost invisible to the naked eye. Maria ran her fingers over these marks, feeling a strange energy coursing through her skin. Each mirror had these marks, and the more she investigated, the more she realized that the mirrors weren't independent. They were connected, like an invisible network of energy that permeated the house. It was as if each mirror was a window to another reality, or a portal to a world of shadows and fears. Maria began to understand that the mirrors seemed to be feeding off each other. What started in one mirror manifested in the others, and the effect seemed to be cumulative. The more the family looked into the mirrors, the stronger these manifestations became. While Maria was lost in thought, the phone rang, interrupting her train of thought. It was Carlos. He was calling from work to check on how things were at home. Maria hesitated for a moment, wondering if she should share her discoveries with him. But something held her back, a feeling that he was already dealing with his own demons, and maybe it was better to wait until she had more information. "Everything's fine here," Maria replied, trying to keep her voice calm. "I'm just doing some research on the house. Routine stuff." Carlos, though concerned, accepted the answer, promising to come home early that day. When Maria hung up the phone, she turned her attention back to the mirrors. She knew she needed to do something, but she wasn't sure what. Destroy the mirrors? That could be dangerous, especially if the mirrors really had the power she suspected. She decided that she needed help. Maybe an expert in occult history, someone who could decipher the symbols and help her understand what was really happening. But that search would have to wait until the next day. For now, her priority was keeping her family safe. As night fell, the house seemed quieter than usual, as if it was waiting. Maria felt that the house itself was aware of her discovery, as if the mirrors knew she was beginning to unravel their secrets. But what Maria didn't yet know was that these secrets were much older and more dangerous than she could imagine, and that the real battle for her family's soul was only just beginning. Things began to unravel faster than Maria could have imagined. What had once been unsettling sensations and disturbing reflections were now manifesting in the real world, threatening the very stability of the Santos family. Carlos, who had always been the pillar of the family, began to lose control over his emotions and his work. That morning, he woke up in a cold sweat after a nightmare that felt more real than any other dream he had ever had. In the nightmare, he was in his office, but the environment around him seemed distorted, as if it were melting. The mirror on the wall was cracked, and in each crack, he saw his face reflected. But each face was a distorted version of himself, failed, desperate. When Carlos tried to pull away from the mirror, he felt his legs give out. He was trapped, unable to move, as the cracks in the mirror expanded like roots of evil spreading within his mind. He woke up with a scream caught in his throat, his face drenched in sweat. Trying to shake off the terror of the dream, Carlos got ready for work, but throughout the day, the images from the nightmare continued to haunt him. He made mistakes he would never normally make, mistakes that began to cost him dearly. By the end of the day, he received a phone call informing him that one of his company's biggest contracts was at risk due to a technical failure in a project he was supervising. Carlos felt on the verge of a breakdown. The visions from the mirror seemed to be materializing in his life, as if his greatest fear, failure, was becoming reality. He knew something was wrong, but he felt powerless to fight it. Meanwhile, at school, Anna was dealing with her own torment. The rumors about her, which had once been mere whispers, had turned into a storm of bullying. Her classmates isolated her, and the social pressure that had always bothered her now seemed unbearable. She began seeing disturbing reflections in mirrors and shiny surfaces everywhere, in the school bathroom, in the hallway windows, even on her phone screen. These reflections were not just distorted, they were versions of Anna that expressed all her insecurities and fears. She saw a weak, invisible girl who would never be accepted. Every time she looked, these visions seemed more real, more alive, and they began to invade her thoughts even when she wasn't near mirrors. Anna began to isolate herself even more, avoiding contact with anyone, including her own family. She felt that no one would understand her, that the reflections she saw were a reflection of who she really was, and that fighting against it was futile. At home, Maria watched all of this with a growing sense of despair. She saw how Carlos was drifting away, how Anna was shutting down, and how Lucas seemed strange and more distant, as if something was still affecting him even after the mirror had been removed from his room. Then, on a particularly dark night, everything came to a head. Carlos arrived home later than usual, exhausted and defeated. Maria tried to talk to him, but he was distant, as if he were enveloped in a cloud of dark thoughts. He went up to the office without saying a word, and Maria was worried, but respected his space. Anna, on the other hand, was locked in her room, avoiding any interaction. Lucas was quiet, playing alone in his room, but Maria noticed that he often looked at the shadows in the corners of the room, as if he expected something to emerge from there. Maria felt that the situation was spiraling out of control. She knew she needed to act, but didn't know how. Everything seemed to be connecting in a dark and dangerous way, and she began to fear that something terrible was about to happen. In the middle of the night, Maria was awakened by a strange sound, a sound she recognized immediately. It was the sound of glass breaking. She jumped out of bed, her heart racing, and ran toward the sound. She reached Carlos's office and found the door ajar. As she pushed it open, she saw a scene that filled her with fear. The mirror in the office was shattered, shards scattered across the floor, and Carlos was kneeling before it, his hands trembling. He was staring fixedly at the fragments of glass, but what he saw there left Maria breathless. In the mirror's shards, there were several versions of Carlos reflected, each more distorted and desperate than the last. Each fragment seemed to tell a different story of failure, loss, and despair. Carlos was trapped in these visions, unable to move, unable to look away. Maria rushed to him, holding his shoulders and trying to snap him out of the trance. "Carlos, wake up! It's me, Maria!" she shouted, her voice thick with fear. Carlos blinked, as if coming back to reality, but the expression on his face was one of pure terror. He finally looked at Maria, his eyes filled with despair. "They showed me everything," he whispered. "Everything I feared the most. They're making it real." Maria hugged him, feeling the urgency in his words, but not knowing what to do. She knew that somehow the mirrors were materializing her family's fears, and that they were losing the battle against something they couldn't see or fully comprehend. That night, Maria made a decision. She knew she could no longer ignore what was happening. The mirrors were trying to destroy her family, feeding on their fears and insecurities. They needed to be stopped. But how do you fight something so intangible? Maria knew she didn't have all the answers, but she was determined to protect her family at all costs. She knew the battle was just beginning, and that what the mirrors had revealed so far was only the surface of something much darker and deeper. As Carlos slowly recovered from the shock, Maria began planning her next move. She knew she would need help to face what was to come, but she also knew that her family's strength would be crucial in winning this fight. Together, they would need to face their deepest fears and survive whatever the mirrors still had to reveal. The Santos house seemed on the verge of collapse, wrapped in a silent darkness that intensified with each passing day. Maria knew they couldn't go on like this. The mirrors were feeding on the family's fears and insecurities, and it was clear that these fears were beginning to manifest in dangerous and real ways. The morning after the incident with Carlos, Maria decided it was time to take drastic action. Gathered with the family in the living room, she knew she needed to talk about what was happening, even if it was difficult. Everyone looked visibly shaken, with dark circles under their eyes and tired expressions. No one could ignore anymore that something was terribly wrong. "We need to talk," Maria began, her voice firm but full of concern. "I know all of you have felt something strange in this house, especially with the mirrors. We can't keep pretending this is normal. Something is very wrong, and it's affecting us in ways I never imagined." Carlos nodded silently, still shaken by the experience of the previous night. Anna avoided her mother's gaze, while Lucas, usually energetic, was restless, fidgeting with his fingers. "These mirrors," Maria continued, "aren't like others. I researched them and discovered that they were made by an old manufactory in France, known for creating special mirrors. Mirrors that somehow reflect more than just our appearance. They reveal our fears, our insecurities, and somehow those fears are becoming real." Anna finally looked at Maria, her eyes shining with a mixture of fear and understanding. I've seen things, Mom. Things in the mirror that aren't real, but they feel so real. I can't take it anymore." "I know, honey," Maria responded gently. "We've all seen them, and that's why we need to face this together. We need to stop these mirrors before they destroy us." "But how?" Carlos asked, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "I've already tried breaking the mirror in the office, but it only made things worse. They're stronger than us." Maria took a deep breath, knowing the answer wouldn't be easy. "I don't think the solution is simply to break them. From what I've discovered, these mirrors are somehow connected to us. They feed on our fears, and maybe the only way to stop this is by facing those fears head-on." A heavy silence filled the room as everyone processed what Maria was saying. The idea of confronting their deepest fears, the ones the mirrors had revealed and amplified, was terrifying. But Maria knew there was no other option. "We need to do this together," she insisted. "The mirrors only have power over us because we're letting them. They're manipulating us, using our fears against us. If we can face what they're showing us, and accept that these fears are a part of who we are, maybe we can weaken them." Carlos finally looked up at Maria, a glimmer of determination returning to his eyes. "You're right," he said. "I've spent my whole life afraid of failing, of not being enough to take care of you. But this can't go on. We can't let these mirrors control us." Anna, still hesitant, agreed. "I've always been afraid of being rejected, of being invisible. These mirrors, they only show what was already inside me. But maybe it's time to stop running from it." Lucas, the youngest, still seemed confused, but he held his mother's hand tightly. "I'll face it too, Mom. I don't want to be afraid anymore." With the decision made, the family prepared for what would be the most challenging night of their lives. Each of them knew they would have to face their own demons, reflected in the mirrors, and come out victorious. Maria organized the plan. They would go from room to room, facing each mirror together. Instead of trying to destroy them, they would look into the reflections and confront the fears the mirrors revealed. The first stop was Anna's room. Everyone gathered around the mirror, where she, with heavy breaths, took a step forward. As she looked into her reflection, she saw the distorted version of herself she had always feared, the invisible girl, rejected by everyone, always on the margins. But this time, Anna didn't look away. She stared deeply into the eyes of the distorted version and, with a trembling voice, said, "I see you. I am you, but you don't define me. I don't need everyone to accept me. I accept myself." The moment those words left her mouth, the reflection began to change. The figure in the mirror softened, the distortions disappearing. Anna saw a stronger, more confident version of herself taking shape in the glass. And then, the mirror went blank, showing only an ordinary reflection. Carlos was next. In the office, he faced the broken mirror that had tormented him. The various distorted versions of himself were still there, each representing a different failure. Carlos felt the weight of these visions, but this time he refused to give in. "Failure is a part of life," he declared, looking at each fragment of his reflection. "But it doesn't define me. I'm not perfect, and that's okay. I am more than my fears." With those words, the mirror fragments began to rearrange themselves, forming a complete and serene reflection. Carlos saw his own face, simple and without distortions. The mirror, once a battlefield of fears, was now just a mirror. Maria and Lucas faced the mirrors in their own rooms. For Maria, it was about accepting the fear of losing control, of not being able to protect her family. For Lucas, it was the understanding that his imagination didn't have to be a place of fear, but rather one of strength. In each case, the mirrors changed, no longer portals of terror, but mere harmless objects. The energy in the house seemed to change as well, as if a great tension had been released. When they were done, the family gathered again in the living room, exhausted but relieved. The house was quiet, but it was no longer the oppressive silence of before. It was a peaceful silence, almost comforting. Maria looked at each of her family members, feeling a wave of pride and love. "We did it," she said with a tired smile. "We faced our fears, and we won." And in that moment, the Santos realized that the mirrors no longer had power over them. The house, which had once seemed a labyrinth of terrors, was now just a house again, a house they could finally begin to turn into a true home. But even as they celebrated their victory, Maria couldn't help but feel that, somewhere, the mirrors still held more secrets, perhaps waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. However, for now, peace reigned, and that was enough. The sense of relief in the Santos house was brief. Although the mirrors seemed to have lost the power that once dominated the family, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. That night, while everyone slept, she lay awake, her eyes fixed on the ceiling, trying to understand what else might be lurking. Around 3 in the morning, Maria was suddenly awakened by a strange noise. A metallic sound, like the creak of a rusty hinge, echoed through the house. She got up slowly, trying not to wake Carlos, and left the room, following the sound down the hallway. The noise seemed to be coming from the attic, a place they had rarely visited since moving into the house. Curiosity, mixed with fear, led Maria to grab a flashlight and climb the narrow stairs leading to the attic. When she opened the heavy door, a blast of cold air enveloped her. The attic was dark and full of shadows, with old furniture covered in dusty sheets and boxes scattered in the corners. But at the far end of the space, something was glowing faintly, reflecting the light of Maria's flashlight. She approached, her heart pounding. It was another mirror, a mirror she had never seen before. This one was different from the others. Its frame was larger, more ornate, carved in a Gothic style with intricate details that seemed to almost move under the flashlight's beam. The glass was flawless, without the stains of time that the other mirrors had. It seemed to be waiting for her, as if it knew she would find it. Maria felt a chill run through her body. This mirror was the source of everything. She could feel it. It was the original mirror, the one that connected all the others. And as she approached, she realized that she didn't just see her own reflection in it. She saw images, flashes of old memories of other people who had lived in that house before her. And then, the image changed. She saw her family reflected in the mirror, but not as they were now. In the reflection, Carlos, Anna, and Lucas were different, pale, with empty eyes and slow movements, as if they were being pulled into the glass. They looked lifeless, as if the mirrors had finally won. Maria stepped back, panic rising in her chest. She needed to destroy that mirror, but she knew it wouldn't be enough. There was something darker there, something that demanded a direct confrontation. Determined, Maria left the attic and returned to the bedroom, waking Carlos. "I found the mirror," she said, her voice tense. "The mirror behind everything. It's in the attic." Carlos, still groggy with sleep, quickly understood the gravity of the situation. "What do we do?" he asked, already getting up. "We need to face it, all of us. If this mirror is the heart of everything, we need to destroy the power it has over us, once and for all." Maria woke Anna and Lucas, quickly explaining what she had discovered. Although they were tired and scared, they knew this was their last chance to end the nightmare the mirrors had brought into their lives. Together, the family climbed the stairs to the attic. The mirror awaited them, its surface now glowing intensely, as if it knew the final confrontation was about to happen. Carlos held Maria's hand firmly, and she did the same with Anna and Lucas. "We're in this together," Maria said, with a confidence she tried to convey to everyone. "The mirrors only have power over us because we let them reflect our fears. But if we can look at them without fear, they won't have any more control." With one last breath of courage, they positioned themselves in front of the mirror. Each of them saw their worst fears reflected back: failure, rejection, abandonment, darkness. But this time, they didn't back away. They didn't look away. Anna was the first to speak. "I'm not invisible," she said, her voice firm. "I'm strong, and I deserve to be seen." Carlos followed. "I'm not a failure. I've fallen, but I've always gotten back up, and I always will." Lucas, with his young voice, but full of determination, stared at the reflection and declared, "I'm not afraid of you. I'm stronger than you." Finally, Maria, feeling a wave of power growing within her, looked at the reflection that showed the loss of control, the fear of not being able to protect her family. "I accept that I can't control everything, but that doesn't make me weaker. It makes me free." When the final words were spoken, the mirror began to tremble. The bright surface rippled like water agitated by a storm. The images in the reflection distorted, then began to disappear as if being sucked into a void. With a loud crack, the Gothic frame of the mirror split, cracks spreading across the glass. And then, with one last explosive sound, the mirror shattered into thousands of pieces, each fragment dissolving into the air before touching the ground. The attic fell silent. The air, once heavy and suffocating, now felt lighter, clearer. The dark energy that had permeated the house had vanished, as if it had never existed. The Santos family stood there for a moment, absorbing what had just happened. They had faced their worst fears, confronted the shadows within themselves, and together they had destroyed the power the mirrors had over them. Finally, Maria let out a sigh of relief. "It's over," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "We did it." Carlos hugged her tightly, followed by Anna and Lucas. It was a collective embrace of triumph and love, proof that despite everything they had gone through, they were still together, stronger than ever. As they descended the stairs from the attic, leaving behind the remains of the mirror, they knew that the house was finally free. And more importantly, that they were too. The darkness had been banished, and with it, the fears that had once seemed insurmountable. Now, only light remained, and the promise of a new beginning. The days following the destruction of the mirror were marked by a sense of relief and renewal in the Santos house. The atmosphere, once heavy with tension and fear, had dissipated, giving way to a long-forgotten tranquility. The house, which had once seemed like a labyrinth of hidden horrors, was now beginning to transform into a true home. Maria woke up every morning with a new energy, a lightness she hadn't felt in months. Carlos, who had been consumed by the fear of failure, now devoted himself to his work with a new perspective, understanding that the mistakes of the past did not define his ability to move forward. Anna, in turn, felt more confident, more capable of facing life's challenges without being paralyzed by the insecurities that had once dominated her. And Lucas, the youngest, returned to being a joyful child, free from the shadows that had haunted him. A month after the final confrontation, the family decided it was time to start redecorating the house. The remaining mirrors, now harmless objects, were removed and replaced with paintings and photographs that brought joy and light to the rooms. One afternoon, while organizing the new decor, Maria found an old box hidden in a corner of the attic that she had forgotten to explore. Upon opening it, she found an old diary, its pages yellowed with age. Curious, she began to read. The diary belonged to a woman named Isabel, who had lived in the house at the beginning of the last century. As Maria read, she realized that Isabel had also had a strange experience with the mirrors in the house. She wrote about how the mirrors revealed her deepest fears and how she had been consumed by them until she finally found the courage to face them. But there was more. Isabel had discovered that the mirrors were part of an ancient ritual, a kind of spiritual test. The only way to overcome the power of the mirrors was by confronting and accepting one's inner demons, exactly as the Santos family had done. When she finished reading, Maria closed the diary carefully, feeling a deep connection with the woman who had lived in the house so long ago. They had gone through the same torment, but both had found the strength to overcome it. Maria decided to keep the diary as a reminder of everything her family had faced and overcome. As the days passed, life in the Santos house returned to normal, but with a new depth. The experience they had gone through together had united them in a way they could never have anticipated. The family bonds, once tested to the limit, were now stronger and deeper. One morning, while having breakfast together, Lucas looked at Maria with a thoughtful expression. "Mom," he said, "do you think the mirrors can still see us?" Maria smiled, placing her hand over Lucas's. "No, sweetheart. The mirrors no longer have power over us. They only reflected what was inside us, and we faced all of that. Now, we're the ones who look at them, not the other way around." Carlos nodded, supporting Maria's words. "We are the masters of our own reflections now, and what we see is a family that has gone through a lot, but has come out stronger than before." Anna, with a sparkle in her eyes, added, "And we've also learned that no matter what happens, we can overcome anything if we're together." That night, before going to bed, Maria walked through each room in the house, making sure everyone was okay. When she reached her own room, she looked at the wall where the mirror used to be. Now, there was a beautiful painting of a flower field, radiating peace and serenity. She smiled to herself, feeling a deep gratitude for everything they had overcome. As she lay down next to Carlos, she felt that finally the house was a safe place, a place of love and resilience. The darkness that had once threatened to destroy the Santos family had been dispelled, replaced by a new light. And although the mirrors had revealed their greatest fears, they had also taught a valuable lesson. True power lies in facing and accepting who we are, with all our flaws and strengths.